I've got in front of me here 8 different dongle style DACs that I've put up against one another to work out whether it's worth spending more money, which ones are better than the others, where should you spend your cash depending on what it is that you need the dongles to do. Let's jump in and explore. Welcome to Passion for Sound, the channel dedicated to thorough and honest reviews of headphones, earphones, DACs, headphone amps, other components and accessories. Basically everything audio related except power amps and passive speakers. My name's Lachlan and my goal is to explore and discuss all kinds of audio topics, even the controversial ones, to help us all find more enjoyment from music. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review, and today, welcome to the great dongle fondle of 2021. I've gathered here in front of me a bunch of dongles, certainly not all of them, but a fairly good representation ranging from some budget style dongles all the way through to some of the more upper end dongles to compare them and see how they sound. Because I've got so many different dongles here on my desk from all different sources, I'm not going to go through and thank everybody that's provided them, but when I start talking about each of the dongles here, I'm going to put on screen the logo of the company that provided it for me, or a few words to thank channel patrons and others who might have loaned me gear. And so do watch out for those thanks. I am very grateful to whoever it is that's loaned me each of these. And as always, I'll put links in the description down below through to all of these in case you want to buy. Where the products have been provided by retailers, I will link through to them as a way of saying thank you. With all that out of the way, let's begin the great dongle fondle. And of course, we're going to start from the bottom end of the scale, being the cheapest entry into this competition, and that's in the form of the Ikko Zerda ITM01. The original Ikko Zerda was a very popular dongle that I was asked about many times, but never actually got a chance to listen to. When I asked Ikko about sending me one, they told me there was a new one coming and subsequently sent me the new ITM01. The ITM01 has a list price of $59 US, making it the cheapest in this roundup, and it has a couple of unique features that nothing else here does. Firstly, it's got this nifty connection system, which is magnetic, and as you see, it does require a fair bit of force to pull it apart, and that connects into a proprietary connector here, which allows for, according to Ikko, a better system for ejecting noise from the external environment. Now, because of this proprietary connector, it does mean you're limited only to the cables that come from Ikko, and it's really good that they've therefore provided a short USB-C cable, but also a long USB-A cable as I've got here. So if you want to use this with a computer, you've got this wonderfully long and very tangled, and that's because of my mismanagement of it, so at one end USB-A, at the other end the magnetic connector. So it's great that they provided that, and it does make the ITM01 very versatile. Something else the ITM01 does is it has multiple sound modes. In the sides of the device here are transparent panels which show through for lighting, and that's to let you know which mode the ITM01 is working in. It's got 3 options available. You've got a yellow mode which is for music listening, a blue mode which is for movie watching, and then a purple mode for gaming. As far as I can tell, the different modes are bringing some kind of DSP to the sound. I personally find music the cleanest and most natural. Movie mode brings the vocals forwards to help dialogue come through cleaner, and it makes things a bit punchier and more dynamic for movie watching. And then the purple gaming mode does something completely different, which if I'm being honest, I don't particularly like. When moving into the purple gaming mode, it actually disconnects the Zerda. It seems to reboot it into a different mode, and then the only controls you have are on the device itself. I'll talk about the controls in a second. And it seems to be doing some really significant DSP work, DSP being digital signal processing, and I think it's trying to replicate a pseudo surround sound effect. To my ears, I don't really enjoy it. I spoke to another patron of the channel who also has the ITM01, and he's not a fan either. So I think maybe they missed the mark on the gaming mode, but that's okay because the default music mode, the yellow mode, is absolutely fantastic, as I'll talk about in a sec. Before we get there though, the final thing I want to mention are the buttons available. So down here on the ITM01, you've got buttons for volume there and there, and also the mode button in the middle. It's not a big deal for me having hardware buttons on a device like this, but it is nice to have. Often I'll have my phone in my pocket and then this will just be dangling out the side of my pocket, and so it's nice and easy to access the volume controls here. The good news is, using something like USB Audio Player Pro, these buttons do control the hardware volume via that app, and therefore I imagine they're going to work the same if you're using an Apple device or the like. So it's a nice feature to have. It's not a deal breaker. It's not a reason that I would put this ahead of any other dongle in this mix, but it is a good feature. Now there's just a couple more things I want to talk about before we get to the sound of the ITM01, and we're going to start by talking about its power output. The ITM01 is listed as having 125 milliwatts at 32 ohms, which is fairly powerful for a device like this. I tested it with both sensitive IEMs and also with high impedance headphones, and it had no problems driving anything I tried it with. Now, a general statement across the board here, this applies to all the dongles we're working with today. None of these are going to match a proper desktop setup. Every single one of these is relying on the USB power supply coming out of your phone or your computer USB socket, and therefore you shouldn't expect it to perform both in terms of power and in terms of overall quality like a decent budget desktop setup. So do recognize these are a compromise to make them small, compact and portable, and therefore you shouldn't expect them to drive a full-sized difficult headphone to the full potential it's capable of. Take that a step further, you shouldn't expect these to drive Sparrows, Abyss 1266s, anything like that. But the good news is they'll quite comfortably handle an HD6XX, a pair of DT880 250 ohms, a pair of even ZMF headphones at 300 ohms, they're all going to be fine. But just don't expect it to drive the very most difficult headphones. And that's true, as I said, for all these dongles, not just the ITM01 here. One final thing on the ITM01 is it does have a habit of letting out a pop when you plug it in and power it on the first time, when you disconnect it, or when you change into that gaming mode that I mentioned before. So basically, anytime the device powers up or powers down, it does send a pop through the headphones. It's not enough to be painful, it's not enough to cause damage, but it is a little bit uncomfortable. And so I am going to hold that against this a little bit, as you'll hear later. But for now, let's talk about the sound quality of the ITM01. The sound from this, and I'm talking all about music mode here, the sound from this is spacious, clean, detailed. It's as good or better than I'd expect for $59 US. Unfortunately, I don't have the Tempur-Tech Sonata HD Pro here anymore, but I imagine it's about on par with that, probably actually a little bit better. Upper registers are smooth, with texture and detail, and the sound is overall pretty neutral and pretty natural. One thing I noticed as I started comparing the dongles was that the ITM01 places vocals quite forward, but not in an intimate way. It's got quite a spacious sound, as I said, but vocals are quite forward and somehow a little bit high in the soundstage. Not in an unnatural way, but just different to some of the others in this roundup. And so setting this as a baseline, it's a really strong start. I did wonder how much benefit I was going to get as I moved up through the range, but certainly the Zerda ITM01 is a really strong option for $59 so long as you can deal with that pop. And as I said, it's not painful, it's not going to damage anything, but I don't particularly like it. And so let's move on to our next contender to see if spending a bit more money gets you a better sound. Moving on now to the Hidizs S3 Pro. This is a relatively new dongle DAC produced by Hidizs, as the name would suggest, and it's a very, very tiny device. It's one of the smallest, most compact dongles that I've ever seen. It's a really simple little form factor with this circular puck on the end of a fly lead with USB-C, and then a simple 3.5mm socket. Hiding on one side, there is also a light right in the center that's going to show you what's going on with the device, and on the back you can see an MQA logo telling you that this is a fully MQA capable dongle. The S3 Pro costs $10 more than the ITM01 that we just looked at, and so I came into this expecting that it should provide slightly better sound. Or maybe we're just paying for a much more compact form factor. This thing is absolutely tiny, so there is a chance that what we're paying for here is the miniaturization. As you might expect, being such a small device, this is less powerful than the ITM01. It's quoted as delivering 55 milliwatts into 32 ohms as opposed to the 125 from the ITM01. But the good news is that again, when I tried it with sensitive IEMs through to high impedance headphones, the S3 Pro had no problems at all. So as you'll see as we go through this test, all of these dongles have plenty of power for high impedance headphones. They also manage very low impedance IEMs with no problems, and so I'm going to stop even mentioning that as we go forward because all of them can do it. I'm going to focus much more on the sound differences between them and any key feature differences. Speaking of feature differences, as I've already mentioned, MQA is a big differentiator between the ITM01 and the S3 Pro if you care about MQA. If you're listening to Tidal all the time, that might come in handy. If you're not, it's probably irrelevant. Given that this is such a small and simple device, there's really nothing else to talk about other than the sound of the S3 Pro up against the ITM01. And it was immediately obvious jumping between the two that the S3 Pro is a thicker, richer sounding dongle. It's not overly thick, but compared to the ITM01's spacious and articulate sound, this definitely had a bit more warmth and richness to it. It also lacks a little bit of the dynamics that the ITM01 has. Now there may be some cases where that's a benefit. If you've got particularly lively, maybe bright sounding IEMs or headphones, this might help to smooth them out and give them a bit more richness. But all in all, I do think the ITM01 is maybe slightly better when it comes to overall sound quality. Because of its sense of richness, the S3 Pro pushes the sound a bit more forward and a bit more intimate, and so vocals are quite prominent in the mix because they're both forward and weightier than the ITM01. Another thing I found from the S3 Pro was that even though it's a bit smoother and richer sounding than the ITM01, the treble quality from the S3 Pro can get just a little bit brittle sounding. It doesn't have the smoothness and the easiness of the ITM01, and that for me is another reason why the S3 Pro I don't think is worth going for if you're happy with the ITM01. You can save yourself $10, you will have to put up with that little bit of a pop from time to time, but I think the sound quality from the ITM01 is just a little bit better. Definitely, the S3 Pro isn't bad, and if you're in the market for something in this budget and you don't want to deal with the pop, the S3 Pro is still a solid choice. But for now, I'm going to keep going with the ITM01 as my current preferred dongle to fondle. And that brings us to the next option in the mix, which is the E1DA 9038D. Now you may find as you look around, there's 1,000,001 different versions of the E1DA. There are constant revisions coming out over the past couple of years. This is the most current single-ended version. So much like the others I've looked at so far, it has a USB-C connection. It's then got nothing else on the body, save for a pinhole LED light. And then at the other end, we've got a 3.5mm socket. So a very basic, very simple device that's built around, as the name would suggest, a Sabre 9038 DAC chip. The E1DA 9038D retails for $99 US, and so if we're comparing it to my current frontrunner in the ITM01, that means it's a full $40 more, so nearly double the price, going up to the E1DA here. And so that begs the question of whether it's worth it. The E1DA is rated to put out 180 milliwatts into 32 ohms, making it the most powerful in this lineup. But at the same time, the others don't struggle with any normal style headphones, and this is still not a device that I would recommend for anything like a Susvara or a 1266. So the power figure from this doesn't really mean a great deal. It's nice to know it's there. It means that in theory, you're not going to be pushing this anywhere near as hard if you do have more difficult headphones. But the others also did just fine. So as I said, I don't think it's a big deal, but you might feel more comfort knowing you've got the power. Going from the ITM01 to the E1DA, it was really evident that it's absolutely worth spending a bit more money. This is a fantastic dongle at the price. For $99 US, you're getting yourself a dongle that has plenty of power, a very dynamic and engaging sound, but one that is also very neutral and clean. I'd seen a lot of hype about this one, I'd been asked about it so many times on the channel, and so I have to say, I came in a little bit skeptical. So often the experience doesn't live up to the hype, but I'm really pleased to say that with the E1DA, it absolutely matches the hype. That doesn't mean it's the best dongle on the market, but it is extremely good. As I've already said, the sound is neutral but dynamic. It's got an excellent sense of separation and clarity in the sound. So you're getting good detail retrieval, you're getting a good sense of soundstage space and individual separation of instruments. It's all really, really excellent. The bass is full and controlled, and it brings the vocals down in the mix compared to the ITM01. Now I'm not saying that's better or worse, it's just different. I think the E1DA is probably just a little bit more coherent overall, but the ITM01 is still excellent, so that's not a knock on that. To me, at this point, if you were in the market for a dongle, for single-ended IEMs or headphones, and you did have up to $100 US to spend, for me, it's absolutely worth spending the extra on the E1DA. I do like the fact that it doesn't use a proprietary cable. I had no sense of problems with noise or interference, so I don't know that that magnetic connection system from the ITM01 is necessary, and so I really think the E1DA is an absolute winner at $99 US. And so for now, what I'm going to say in this battle is that if you're after the absolute budget choice here, it is the ITM01, but if you can spend a bit more, the E1DA is now the head of the pack. So far, this is the dongle that I most want to fondle. But as I said, that doesn't mean it's the best in the whole bunch, it just means that so far it's the best for under $100. So what happens if we step over the $100 mark and go to $129 in the form of the EarMen Eagle? The Eagle has a very similar form factor, but in this case it uses a USB-A connection. What that means is you will need a fly lead, which does come with it, to go from USB-A into USB-C if you're using it with your phone. But on the flip side, if you're using it with a computer, it's going to plug straight in. The design and finish of the Eagle I think is probably even nicer than the E1DA, which is fairly industrial, fairly basic, it's just an all-metal shell. When you go to the Eagle though, what you're getting is a nice glass finish on the front and on the back. It's got aluminium sides, 3.5mm socket there, and as I said, the USB-A socket here. So it's still a very compact device, it's beautiful in terms of its feel in the hand and its build quality, and so while that wouldn't separate it for me for spending an extra $30 odd from the E1DA, it definitely feels like you're getting your money's worth. Interestingly, the Eagle uses an older version of the chip used in the S3 Pro, but as you'll hear in a moment, the chip choice is not everything, because this is far better than the S3 Pro, even though the S3 Pro is using the newer version of the chip that's in here. The Eagle is only modestly powerful at 62 milliwatts into 32 ohms, so it's less than half the power of the E1DA, but again had no problems driving anything I threw at it. Jumping between the E1DA and the Eagle, it was very evident that this is a more refined sound. The folks over at EarMen have done absolute wonders with the Eagle. For the price you pay for this, it's an absolutely stellar device. It essentially sounds just like the E1DA in terms of everything I've already described, only better refined. The treble is smoother, but still equally detailed and textured. The overall presentation and the soundstage is at the same time just as spacious, just as detailed, but also better refined, more realistic and more natural somehow. And so the E1DA I would say is a fantastic dongle. The fact that it sits under that $100 mark is quite important. It's going to be a barrier for some people going over that. You might also prefer the fact that the E1DA has the USB-C connection instead of the sticky outy USB-A connection here. But for me, if you can spend the extra $30, it's absolutely worth going to the Eagle. I can't tell you a great deal more because they are so similar between the E1DA and the Eagle, but the Eagle just does it all a little bit better. To me, they're both great choices, but to me, I would spend a bit more and get the Eagle if you're in a position to do so. And so at this point, that brings the Eagle to the top of the pile and puts it up against our next contender in terms of the Astell Kern PEE51. The PEE51 is clearly the best built in this lot. In terms of the housings, I'm not speaking about the cable connectivity and the longevity of those connections, but in terms of its feel, its weight, its design, it's pretty spectacular. As you can see, it's got this slightly angular design, which all the A&K stuff seems to have now. It's very simple, there's nothing flashy going on. You've got a small pinhole LED, you've got a 3.5mm socket, and at the other end of the fly lead, a USB-C. So it's again a very simple device, there's nothing too flashy going on, but it's beautifully made. And in fact, for some people, it might be too heavy. If you've got this hanging out of your pocket, so the USB-C end connected to a phone, and this coming out, it might actually have too much weight to it. It's a little bit over the top potentially in terms of build quality, but at the same time, I can't help but admiring how great it feels in the hand. One of the big marketing points from Astell Kern is that this is using dual Cirrus Logic chips, and it certainly does have a slightly different tonal character to some of the other dongles in this review, but it's not vastly different. It's also rated as having 2 volts power output maximum, and that's both interesting in the sense that it means it's got plenty of voltage available, but it doesn't necessarily tell us how it performs at each individual impedance. So I can't tell you the 32 ohm impedance ratings, I can't tell you exactly where it sits with the others in terms of power. What I can tell you is that again handled the same test as all the others, no problems at all. No hiss for sensitive IEMs and no problems with high impedance headphones. I also just realised that I forgot to mention this is a $149 dongle, making it $20 more than the Eagle. And in putting it side by side with the Eagle, I do think the A&K might be just a hair better than the Eagle overall. It's got a beautiful, full, rich sound, but it also manages to be textured and breathy when needed. Whether it actually is better than the Eagle, that's going to be one for personal preference. But if you like your sound richer and fuller, without losing texture and detail and breathiness, then I do think the A&K is worth considering. One issue that I had though was that I noticed that it lost connection pretty easily from my phone, whereas none of the others did. That could be due to the weight pulling on the cable, or it could be due to the cable itself and how it's designed. I'm not entirely sure. So do take that into account. It may be that something like the Eagle is a better choice because it's lighter weight, but if you are looking for a rich, refined sound, the A&K is worth considering in the mix. For the sake of this battle, I'm going to err back towards the Eagle. I think they're both very, very similar in sound, and I do like the fact that I have no connectivity issues with the Eagle ever for any reason whatsoever, and that's just going to keep it in the mix ahead of the A&K at this stage. So let's put that one down. We're going to continue for now with the Eagle as the dongle that I most want to fondle, and put it up against another dongle that sits at the same price as the A&K at $149, or $20 more than the Eagle. And that takes us now to the Hidizs S9. This is not the S9 Pro. I didn't have a chance to get my hands on the S9 Pro, but I thought the S9 might still be a good reference point for some people. At $149, this is the first in the lineup that brings us a balanced connection. So we've now got down here a USB-C socket on one end and a pair of outputs on the other. So you've got 3.5 and 2.5mm. Other than that, it's a very simple device with a light behind the Hidizs logo in much the same way that there's a light behind the EarMen logos. It's a nice simple design. It's not my favorite. It's a bit blocky and a bit chunky. It's got these sections on the sides here you can see that stick out of the main body. So this section here. And I'm not necessarily a huge fan of those. It does break up what would have been an otherwise quite slim device. And it's also very light, which might mean it's great because it's not putting any weight on the cable, or it might mean it's a bit flimsy and not as well made. I'll leave that up to you to decide. Everybody perceives these things differently. Power output from this one, keeping in mind it's balanced, which normally means extra power, is 125 milliwatts at 32 ohms. So it's good solid power. It's not as much as the single-ended E1DA, but it's got a good amount of power available. Listening to it using the balanced output, I'll talk about single-ended in a moment, the sound from the S9 is a bit thinner sounding than the Eagle is. It does a great job at producing a beautiful image, great separation of sound, a good sized overall soundstage, but it does lack a bit of weight in the overall presentation. And that to me makes the Eagle sound a bit more natural and realistic and lifelike. Having said that though, there will be those that love the lightness and the articulate sound that the S9 produces. As always, system synergy comes into play here. If you had a pair of thicker or richer sounding IEMs or headphones and you want to give a bit more lightness to the sound, then the S9 would be the choice. If though you love the sound that you've already got, the Eagle is going to stay more true to the path, more truly neutral, whereas this is bordering into cold and analytical without going too far. It's still enjoyable, it's just not quite, I think, as true to source as the Eagle. Flipping over to the single-ended output, as is often the case in these devices, it is a little bit of a downgrade from the balanced output, and in fact I'd put the single-ended output from this below a product like the E1DA. It's probably on par with the ITM01, so you should really only spend $149 on this if you know you're going to be using it balanced. If you're looking for a single-ended device, buy the Eagle or buy the E1DA. And so at this point, I'm not prepared to crown the S9 as the dongle I most want to fondle, and I'm going to stick with the good old EarMen Eagle. Is this going to become the most fondleable dongle that we've got in this review? We're going to have to wait and see, but it's looking really good because I've only got two more to go through. The first one I've actually compared directly to the Eagle before, and that's the NextDrive Spectra X. Now these are also available under another name if you're using it with an iPhone. I will put a link down below. I can't off the top of my head remember the name that's given to the Apple version, but I'll put it down below in the description if you're looking for one of these for an Apple. As you can see straight away here, we've got a very different form factor. The Spectra X here uses a very simple barrel style design. As you can see here, it's got a 3.5mm socket at one end, and at the other end of a fly lead, it's got a USB-C socket. In between those is a simple cable here, like a fly lead cable, and that apparently has caused some people trouble. I've had no issues with this. I haven't used it heavily, but I have been using it ever since I first reviewed it. I really like it, and I've had no issues at all. But I have heard of some people finding the cable gets detached from the housing or has connectivity issues in general. So do take that into account, but having said that, it might be that those people treated it really roughly. so I'm not sure and I don't want to put too much weight on that point. The Spectra X comes in at $150, making it just $1 more than things like the Astell Kern or the Hidizs S9, and therefore $21 more than the EarMen Eagle. This drops back to single-ended only, as we've already covered off, and it also has pretty modest power output at just 49 milliwatts at 32 ohms. But don't feel like it's underpowered, it's still managed everything I tried it with, no problems at all. The biggest separation with the Spectra X is the way it sounds. It's got this wonderful, rich, full and dynamic character to it that I find absolutely addictive. It's probably not truly natural, it's a bit more coloured than something like the Eagle, but in all the right ways in my opinion. One thing it does really nicely is it seems to lift the sub bass a little bit. It's not a huge lift, it's not like a bass boost type thing, but it definitely has this presence and punch down low coming from the sub bass, and that's what I really, really love about it. Because of that richness and warmth in the sound, it does create a much more intimate sense of presentation, but it doesn't feel claustrophobic or closed in. There's still a good sense of separation of sounds, it's just within a smaller overall space. So for those that really value space and separation and neutrality, you'll probably want to go for the Eagle still. But if you want fun and engagement with very high quality in all other ways, then I do think the Spectra X is a great choice. To me, the Spectra X is a very specific sound done very, very well. Namely warm, rich and engaging. It's kind of like what I described from the Astell Kern, but I think it's done just a little bit better in the sense that it's gone a little bit further down the path of being warm and rich. Having said that, if you put me on the spot and asked me which of these two I would still want to fondle, it's the Eagle that would still be the dongle that I most want to fondle. And the reason for that is that it's cheaper, it provides a more neutral sound which is going to suit everything really well, and there's none of the concerns of potential disconnections or failures in the cable from the Spectra X. So at this point, I don't want to suggest the Spectra X isn't a great choice, I think it's fantastic, but the EarMen Eagle is still an absolute champ. For the price that you're paying for this, it is absolutely astounding what it does. And that means it's time to put it up against the ultimate competitor in its sibling, the EarMen Sparrow. As you'll see as I hold these together, they're very, very similar looking devices. But where the EarMen Eagle used the USB-A connection, the Sparrow moves to a fly-lead USB-C. And that's been a bit of a problem for EarMen. If you've seen any of the chatter on forums, even on this channel here, you'll know that EarMen had some big problems with electromagnetic interference with the original Sparrow. They've since released new cables for these, and in my experience testing it, it does seem to have alleviated the noise problems. And so I'm going to compare the Sparrow here on the understanding that it's using the new cables and therefore not experiencing any of those issues. The Sparrow once again has a nice simple design. It's got this beautiful glass front and back, very similar to the Eagle. On the top here we've got a USB-C socket, and on the bottom we've got a pair of sockets for 3.5mm and 2.5mm balance connection. Like the Eagle and also the Hidizs S9, that logo there does light up to show you things like which format is being played. It'll also show you if it's using MQA, so this is another MQA capable device. And all in all, it just feels and looks like a really premium product. At $199 US, it's a full $70 more than the EarMen Eagle, and for that what you're getting is MQA capability and also the ability to drive balanced earphones and headphones. The catch is the single-ended output is not as good as the Eagle, and so once again this is a product you should only really go for if you're looking to drive balanced earphones and or headphones. The single-ended output isn't bad, but if you're predominantly using single-ended, there's no point buying the Sparrow when the Eagle is already so good. Firing up the Sparrow with balanced output, the sound is still the very best I've ever heard from a dongle. It's an absolutely fabulous sounding device. The sound is all at once spacious and detailed, but smooth. It's accurate tonally. It just does everything really, really well. Again, I want to point out that doesn't mean it's a replacement for a desktop style DAC and amplifier setup, but for $200 for a portable system running balanced headphones or earphones, it's going to be very, very hard to beat, short of going to a full-size digital audio player. And even then, it's probably going to beat a lot of the cheaper ones. For me, I don't really see a point choosing something like the S9 from Hidizs when you could either go up a little bit and get the Sparrow for balanced output, or go down a little bit and get something like the Eagle for single-ended output. And so for me, the Sparrow is easily the dongle that I would most want to fondle for balanced output. The Eagle is the dongle I'd most want to fondle for single-ended output. But I also want to make some strong mentions again of the Ikko ITM01, which I think for the price is absolutely exceptional. I've been chatting to a patron on the channel, as I mentioned before, and he has found this to be very, very hard to beat, short of going to a desktop device for his needs. And my point there being that sometimes in a portable situation, you don't need the absolute best possible sound. If you don't compare this with anything else directly, it sounds incredibly enjoyable, incredibly engaging, and technically very, very competent. That said, if you can spend a bit more, I do want to give also a special mention to the E1DA 9038D. For $99, as I said before, this is absolutely killer. If you can spend a bit more and get the Eagle, I do believe you're getting better sound. But for $99, or if you happen to get it on special for even less, the E1DA is fantastic. Sometimes the hype around these products, as I mentioned before, doesn't really stack up. A Tempur-Tech Sonata HD Pro doesn't beat anything else that I've got here on the table. Maybe the Hidizs S3 Pro perhaps, but for a while there it was being hyped as the best thing ever. In the case of the E1DA 9038D, it kind of is worth the hype at the price. But I think the takeaway message for anyone watching this video should be it is worth spending a little bit more depending on what it is that you need and what you're looking for. But at the same time, you can get excellent performance at each tier of price. That said, before you go and buy one of these and think it's going to do everything for you, like a very affordable desktop DAC and amp combo, do think about how you're going to be using it most. You might be better off spending a smaller amount on the dongle and saving up to buy a small desktop setup if that's where most of your listening happens. If you're mostly mobile, then spend a bit more on the dongle and enjoy the maximum possible sound. This has obviously been a long and detailed review, so I thank you for watching me all the way through. I hope you found it helpful and useful. Hopefully it saved you some money and made your decision-making process easier. If it has, I'd love it if you'd hit subscribe and like to help the channel continue to grow. Thank you for all your help, and for now let me leave it to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.